On February the 8th of this year, I attempted to begin my first day of work as a shopper, sort of bagger, in a grocery store. So, a grocery store that provides natural foods, provides organic foods, as well as some conventional foods. My understanding is that it's a grocery store. It's a large chain, including having international reach. It also has a philanthropic effort, including a philanthropic effort that engages in microfinance in other countries. And it also is started and headquartered here in Texas. As a matter of fact, my understanding is its corporate headquarters are in Austin. I attempted to sign up to work for them. I went through a period of online training. I understood at the time that they had recently engaged in a process of merger with a large company that, among other things, provides logistics services as well as online retail. And that in the course of the training, I was learning about the process specifically to the store, but also in connection with that merger. I did not know that there had been substantial litigation concerning this store and the merger, as well as other matters that had been pending for the previous several years. And I did not know that benchmark dates in those cases actually directly correlated with dates in the cases I had attempted to file within first the Supreme Court of Texas, then the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, and then later the federal district court system. I did not know these things when I attempted to apply for the job. I did know that they told me to start working on a day that ended up correlating with a benchmark date in a case that had been filed in Dallas, and I was seeking employment at a store in Dallas. The first day of work, I was part of a orientation process, and in the point of that orientation process was exposed to things that I believe created a hazard, a peril, a very significant consideration. And it's just something I've seen every time I've tried to get a job in the last 3 years, especially since I came to Dallas. Even if I'm trying to get a job outside of Dallas, in one of the cities outside of Dallas, every single time something happens on the job that literally presents a risk concerning what I already know could be and what they presumably through their training program have identified as potentially being components in chemical weapons, component items in the development of chemical weapons. Now, some could say, well, it's hazardous material, but I've already been through training in non-destructive testing on techniques that would be necessary to explore and to engage in order to engage in processes of industrial inspection or inspection of industrial facilities, up to and including gas and oil facilities, up to and including petrochemical refining facilities, and or facilities having to do with the water system. I already know this. And I already know that when I go on site and you tell me that we're supposed to go through a training process, and especially when we're supposed to sign documentation that we've received training in regards to how to address handling hazardous materials, including chemicals, and then you intentionally allow for me to be exposed to a situation where staff is making jokes or acting lightly about a misapplication of safe handling procedures when it comes to chemicals or component items in chemical weapons, I cannot remain on site. And this has been the experience I've had the entire time I've been in Dallas. This has also been connected to the experiences I've had when I was banned from the library in downtown Dallas after I was reviewing items connected to the Smith Act online and was threatened with getting sprayed with mace because I don't even really know why the threat to be exposed to chemical weapons was made. I'm more concerned about why they were saying that I was making a disruption when I was silently reading the Smith Act. Now, I say this because right here what I have is what I had done for several days while I was doing the training online before I actually attended the first day. Intention was to get a job, a regular minimum wage job, hopefully doing something that would give me access to fresh foods. For the entire time I've been inside, I've had to travel to a food donation distribution site. I understand that these places, in some way, shape, or form, end up getting the majority of the food that they distribute to the community from the food bank. This is not necessarily something that's questionable. Food banks, I think, on principle, are a very positive thing to have. You know, the differences in terms of the distribution model that has happened in conjunction with COVID-19 is one thing to consider, especially in terms of the kind of political associations, as well as considerations of concurrent contract bidding when it comes to distribution or access to food through one of these distribution centers. But insofar as the actual people involved are doing what they're doing, including, I understand, in a completely good faith, genuine, sincere effort based on whatever the justification or the, shall we say, impetus is, to provide food, including healthy food, including fruits and vegetables, to members of their community. I support it not only politically, but I had need of it. It was the means by which I have been able to acquire fresh foods when I've had access to them. Well, I'd hoped to get this job where I'm actually working in a food store that provides fresh food, both to support myself and being able to get the kind of food I want, but also maybe providing some sort of possibility for, getting to engage with the communities in different ways than just going to them when I have a need for food. Literally, a need for food. And this is understanding, as I do, I'm a political person, and so are they. We would like to be able to engage in a sophistication and a consideration of what our rights are and what our capacities are beyond just our basic food needs. And if we have to address our basic food needs, then we need to be able to do so comprehensively. So in the course of that, I understood that not only was I going to be able to get my nutrition and my food needs met, but I was going to be able to actually have employment. And part of what I was hoping to do with that employment was to lay in effect a process of budgeting where I would be able to attend training courses in radiological safety in order to supplement what I would need to supplement in order to participate in a process of recertification for my non-destructing testing certificates. I received them 4 years ago, but in some standards, including standards I aspire to be able to meet, one is required to recertify when it comes to non-destructive testing certification at least every 5 years. So this would have been the year in order to work, to make the money, in order to attend the training outside of the hours I was working, and then to be able to get the certification I needed from the training facility regarding the specific techniques, so that when I contact the standards body and sign up to take the official test through the standards body, I have the documentation I need, that I've received the training that I need in order to be able to qualify to take the test for the standards body, and then to be able to back that up. So I created a budget, and in conjunction with that budget, I also created a budget that would have allowed for a consideration of my work products, what I did with work, including what I got as compensation, to also be used to support a monthly budget around what would be considered healthcare, or in my case, what I would call it would be wellness, and basic maintenance, how to make sure we get what we need on a monthly basis, a form of preventative health. I'm not talking about creating a scenario where you create or so-called simulate a catastrophe and then try to cut off transactional moments that allowed for the proliferation of the financing of that catastrophe, including in ways that sabotage specific people that have been predeterministically identified as a proxy for whatever that eliminated, whatever's needed for elimination, which I understand somebody understands to be a prevention model, but only for the purposes of financialization. When it comes to actual prevention, you actually need to get people the appropriate nutrition. People need to be able to be provided with exercise. They need to have the environmental factors attenuated, and they need to be conscious. They need to be able to engage in other processes that can help them with regeneration. It's one of the reasons I think that a lot of these confidentiality and non-disclosed arrangements are actually intentionally orchestrated in order to exacerbate people's health, including physical health, based upon intentional subjection to repeated and recurrent episodes of trauma, including trauma that comes with gaslighting and trauma that comes with repression of what they're otherwise capable of doing. Applying analytical thinking, especially when one is able to understand logically a trauma that one is experiencing, is part of how we can maintain ourselves, especially if we're being subjected to harm or if we're in a situation where our environment is exposing us to harm. This is something I've personally learned. I understand that there are others that have philosophical or scientific analyses related to these, but this is from my practical experience and what I've been subjected to and what I've encountered. Trying to tell somebody that's conscious, that understands rationally and logically what is happening to them, that they need to deny their own capacity to understand their own situation and instead allow for a false paradigm to supplant it in order to demonstrate behavioral compliance is the worst healthcare decisions that have ever been made. And I believe there are people that know that. And so when it gets to matters related to creating a budget, maintaining a budget, and meeting benchmarks in consideration of making that budget, doing something as simple as what would otherwise be shopping or maybe a form of manual labor in order to make money to meet benchmarks on a weekly or monthly basis with an anticipation that you'll be able to engage in some training in order to better yourself, that you'll also be able to get on a monthly basis what you need to provide yourself with nutrition. And hopefully after a year, you'll have saved up enough money to get something equivalent to a savings bond so that once you get recertified, you have the capacity to insure or bond your own certificates. These are very logical, very simple things. So I created a budget before I even went to work. I had created a budget for these things, and not only that, but the budget would have allowed for me to be able to pay a modest amount in rent or assist with things around the facility where I am, maybe make some improvements in the actual fixed asset structure associated with my indoor arrangement. It's very modest, but it was absolutely doable based upon what they told me at the beginning was going to be the expectation of my work performance and what I had sought and knew was available at the time. Now, I laid the budget out, including the recertification programs, which were between $700 and $2,000, depending upon which one I'd chosen. I'd hoped to take more than one in order to compare and contrast the techniques, and there were ones at different times of the year, including one that is, if I understand it, the first option was supposed to start in June for that one. And then I kept a weekly budget where I took everything, I hand wrote it. I didn't write it down, type it up. And then I kept a monthly tally on what the costs were, what would have been the total income, and what would have been available for savings. And also went through and looked through two different budgets. You know, if you're doing contracting in a municipal entity, and you need to get at least 3 references for certain bids, right? So you've got to look at more than one area or more than one place in terms of not just the pricing, but the other intrinsic characteristics or the other things you would consider. And so I went through that when it came to consideration of what would have been my preventative health care budget. I had 3 different places that I was considering and was hoping to actually purchase a great deal of that in connection with the place I was working at. Now, why do I say this in connection with an understanding that it's 1 year after what I had put forth concerning the former Soviet Union and Iraq? Because I think it's absolutely relevant to what it was that was actually going on at that time and what's going on now. I've not been able to make this budget. I've tried since then twice to get another job doing something comparable, something that doesn't require a national security background check, something that requires a relatively modest amount of physical labor, something that isn't supposed to be exposing you to very significant environmental risk. But what keeps happening is somebody keeps using the actual literal events and work associated with those areas in a proxy scenario that takes a small, what would seem like a relatively minor area, a relatively minor event, and engages in and around it in ways that are so incomprehensible in terms of why very simple consideration cannot be paid to what otherwise doesn't make sense, that I already know it's a setup. And based upon the reactions of pretty much everybody else, regardless if there's 5 people in the room or in some cases, if there's more than 5, up to 20, the question becomes, what is really going on? Why are people at a food store leveraging safety regarding chemical cleaners? Chemical cleaners that contain chemicals that are acknowledged as being identified in a hazardous material inventory for that specific literal location that they already know require a certain kind of handling. But somebody like me also knows that taken out of that context and taken somewhere else can be used in another manner, and that there are standards and presumably even law enforcement training scenarios, as well as public health department training and readiness scenarios that require every worker to know those things. to know what could constitute a component of a chemical weapon. And yet, even at a food store, they refuse to apply what they've just trained you on in regards to safe handling of chemicals. The total for my budget and what I needed was actually relatively modest. Within a year, I could have made $21,551.64 after tax and after what would have been the investment in the employee pension fund. See, it's the employee pension fund and the information about the employee pension fund that provides the linchpin. The places that would give me a callback for an interview all have certain things in common, including in common with the police department. This is a very significant concern. So I'm going to close this video and make one more.